She walked out onto that stage like she had nothing left to lose. No stylist. No entourage. No grand entrance. Just a small Filipino woman in a simple dress, clutching the microphone stand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The BGT audience barely stirred. A few whispered. Someone near the back laughed. And Simon Cowell, sitting behind that judge's table with that permanent look of prepared boredom, glanced down at his notepad like he was already thinking about the next act. Nobody in that arena had any idea what was about to happen. Her name was Regine Velasquez. And she had crossed an ocean to stand on that stage. Most people in that auditorium had never heard of her. But in the Philippines, her name is not just a name. It is a religion. She is not called a singer. She is called the Asia Songbird. A voice so rare, so devastatingly powerful, that audiences across Asia have wept in their seats for 30 years just hearing her begin a note. 30 years of sold-out arenas. 30 years of broken records. 30 years of being the standard by which every other singer in the region is measured. And yet here she stood. Alone. On a foreign stage. In a country that did not know her name. Simon leaned forward. "What's your name, love?" She smiled. Quietly. Without performance. Regine. Regine Velasquez. From the Philippines. The audience gave a polite, distant applause. The kind you give someone you've never heard of and don't expect much from. Amanda Holden smiled diplomatically. Alicia Dixon nodded. Bruno Tonioli tilted his head with that look that says, "Let's see what you've got, sweetheart." Simon said nothing. He simply sat back and waited. And that is the moment everything changed. The music began. Soft. Almost fragile. Just a piano, threading a melody through the silence of that enormous theater. Regine closed her eyes. Breathed once. Twice. And then she opened her mouth. The first note stopped time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a showstopper opener designed to shock. It was a sound so pure, so aching with restraint, that the audience didn't react with cheers. They reacted with silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something hits a human being so deep in the chest that the body simply forgets to make noise. Simon Cowell blinked. He sat forward in his chair. By the second line of the song, two women in the front row were already crying. Not quietly. Openly. Tears running down their faces, hands pressed to their mouths, unable to explain why. This is what Regine's voice does. It does not ask for your emotion. It does not negotiate. It reaches inside your chest, finds the thing you buried years ago, and it pulls it into the light. And then came the chorus. The piano fell away. The full arrangement rose. And Regine Velasquez opened her voice to its full, devastating power, a sound so enormous, so perfectly controlled, so achingly human that the entire BGT audience lurched to their feet in one single, simultaneous movement. Not one by one. All of them. Together. As if the sound had physically lifted them. Simon Cowell's pen dropped from his hand. He did not pick it up. He was staring at the stage with an expression no one in that building had seen on his face in years. Not appreciation. Not surprise. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief, the grief of someone who had forgotten that music could do this to a person, and was now being reminded, violently and without warning. Amanda had her hand over her heart. Alicia had tears streaming openly down her face, not bothering to wipe them. Bruno stood, applauding, his face twisted with emotion he clearly hadn't expected to feel today. But Simon. Simon did not move. He sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on this small woman from the Philippines who was standing on his stage and destroying every wall he had built around himself with a single voice. The camera caught his face for 3 full seconds. And those 3 seconds went around the world. Regine held the final note. She held it longer than seemed physically possible. The note climbed. And climbed. And climbed. The audience was screaming now, not cheering, screaming, the kind of sound that comes out of a human body when they witness something they cannot process in any other way. The sound was pure. The note was perfect. And when it finally ended, Regine lowered her head. The roar that followed was the loudest sound that BGT stage had heard all season. And then Simon Cowell stood up. Simon Cowell. The man who has said no to thousands. The man who once told a contestant that their performance was one of the worst things I have ever heard in my life, on live television. The man whose standing ovations are rarer than solar eclipses and carry more weight than any trophy ever could. He stood. The cameras caught him wiping the corner of his eye. He didn't speak immediately. He pressed his lips together, jaw working like he was trying to find language for something that had temporarily short-circuited the language center of his brain. The audience was chanting. The sound was deafening. Regine stood at the center of the stage, tears now falling freely, shoulders trembling, looking like a woman who had just survived something, who had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. Simon finally raised the microphone. The crowd fell silent instantly. I don't say this often, Simon began, his voice quieter than usual, stripped of performance. I don't say this to many people. But I need you to know something. He paused. A long pause. The kind that fills a television screen with pure electricity. I have been doing this for over 20 years. I have sat in this chair and I have heard thousands of voices. And I can count on one hand, the voices that made me feel the way you just made me feel. The audience erupted again. Simon raised his hand gently and they quieted. You didn't just sing, he said. You reminded me why this exists. Why any of this exists. You came here from the Philippines, where people already know what you are. And you came here anyway. To a stage that didn't know your name. And you made every single person in this building feel something they're going to carry with them for a very long time. He stopped. He looked at her directly. Who are you? He said softly. Not as a question. As a statement of awe. Regine smiled through her tears. I'm just a girl who loves to sing. Simon shook his head slowly. Like that answer was the most simultaneously humble and devastating thing he had ever heard. Amanda Holden was the first to move. Her hand went to the gold buzzer. And then Simon's hand came down too. Both buzzers. At the same time. The stage exploded in a cascade of golden confetti. The lighting shifted to deep gold. The crowd was on its feet screaming. Regine stood at the center of it all, arms at her sides, head tilted back, crying with the kind of joy that only comes after a very long and very difficult road. The confetti rained down on her hair, her shoulders, her simple dress. She was laughing and crying simultaneously, that rare and beautiful human expression that only exists in moments of complete, overwhelming grace. Simon walked around the table. He walked to the stage. He climbed the stairs. And he stood in front of Regine Velasquez and looked at her for a moment before saying, quietly, just to her, the microphone barely catching it, the world needed to hear you. I'm glad it finally did. He hugged her. Simon Cowell, in front of 20 million viewers, hugged her like she was someone he had been waiting to find for 20 years. Regine buried her face in his shoulder and wept. The audience wept with her. And somewhere in the Philippines, across 15,000 miles of ocean, in living rooms and kitchens and offices and schools, people were watching on their phones and on their televisions, and they were crying too. Not because they were surprised. They were crying because the world had finally seen what they had always known. That Regine Velasquez is not just a singer. She is a voice that God made once, and will never make again. And on that BGT stage, under that golden light, with confetti falling like snow and 20,000 strangers weeping for a woman they had not known 5 minutes ago, the world finally understood. Some voices don't just sing. Some voices heal. And this one just healed something in Simon Cowell that he didn't even know was broken.